The courtroom fell silent as the little girl adjusted the microphone. Her eyes, wide and determined, scanned the room before she spoke. "My mom works at NASA," she said, her voice steady despite her small frame. A burst of laughter erupted from the defense table. "A future actress," muttered Daniel Peterson, the opposing lawyer, loud enough for the room to hear. It wasn't just disbelief, it was mockery. Meet Amara Johnson, 9 years old, a lover of stars, books, and asking too many questions. But today, she wasn't in a science fair or a classroom. She was on the witness stand, trying to tell the truth in a room full of adults who thought they knew better. Amara is not just a girl with a vivid imagination. She's a child with a voice no one was ready to hear. The conflict. It began at school, a place meant to be safe, where Amara found herself ridiculed for dreaming too big and for being different. Her words were twisted. Her truth turned into entertainment for those who refused to see her worth. But this isn't just a story about a child's voice being ignored. It's about the price of truth, the weight of prejudice, and the strength it takes to stand up when everyone else is laughing. And here's our promise. What happens in that courtroom will challenge everything you think you know about courage, justice, and identity. Stay with us until the end, because when the door opens and the truth walks in, you'll want to be here to see it. If stories of resilience and justice inspire you, make sure to subscribe now. You won't want to miss what's about to unfold. Oak Ridge Elementary stood beneath a blanket of gray clouds, the kind that made everything look colder than it was. Inside Classroom 2B, the hum of pencils and soft whispers echoed against the beige walls. In the back row sat Amara Johnson, a girl with large, curious eyes and neatly braided hair. Her notebook was filled with sketches, stars, rockets, planets, and something labeled Orion Project, classified. "Amara," her teacher, Mrs. Cooper, called gently, "would you mind sharing what you're drawing?" Without hesitation, Amara stood. She walked to the front of the class and held up her notebook. "It's a spacecraft. My mom helps design these. She works for NASA." Some students giggled. One boy whispered, "Sure she does." Another snorted, "Next you'll say she's an astronaut." Mrs. Cooper offered a tight smile. "Let's thank Amara and move on." But the damage was done. The room buzzed with disbelief, sarcasm, and quiet cruelty that clung to her like static. That lunchtime, things got worse. A group of boys cornered her near the jungle gym. "Hey, space girl," one sneered, "show us your rocket. Or wait, do you ride it to school?" The others laughed, circling her like they were in on a secret joke. Amara stood her ground. "My mom works on propulsion systems. She helps people go to space." "You're lying," the tallest boy said. "People like your mom don't work at NASA." That last sentence wasn't about jobs, it was about skin. It was about background. It was about a belief that someone like her didn't belong among the stars. The school counselor, Mrs. Jennings, later found her sitting alone near the lockers. "Amara, sweetie, what happened?" Amara hesitated. "They said I'm lying. That people like us can't be scientists." Mrs. Jennings offered a kind smile and patted her shoulder. "Kids say mean things. Don't let it bother you." But that wasn't enough. Words matter, especially when you're 9. That evening, the school principal, Mr. Dorsey, sent a note to Amara's mother. "We've had some concerns about Amara's storytelling in class. Perhaps a conversation at home could help ground her expectations." Ground her expectations. When Dr. Elise Johnson read the message, her jaw tightened. She stared at the paper in disbelief. A Harvard graduate, an aerospace engineer, a black woman in one of the most exclusive programs at NASA, and now her daughter was being told to dream smaller. She looked at Amara, who sat quietly at the kitchen table, scribbling constellations on loose paper. "Elise," her husband Malcolm said softly, reading the letter over her shoulder, "they're not questioning Amara. They're questioning you." Amara looked up. "Did I do something wrong?" Elise kneeled beside her. "No, baby. But sometimes the truth scares people who live in small worlds." At school the next day, Amara stayed silent. She didn't draw rockets. She didn't raise her hand. When Mrs. Cooper asked questions, she looked out the window. That silence spread. Mrs. Jennings, sensing something was wrong, invited Amara back for a talk. "Amara, I just want to help you feel comfortable here. Maybe tone down some of your stories, okay? Some kids feel intimidated." "But I'm not lying," Amara whispered. "I know, sweetheart," Mrs. Jennings said quickly, "but perception matters. Maybe you can say your mom works in tech. That sounds more relatable." It wasn't the bullying that hurt the most. It was the way adults smoothed over the truth, the way they asked her to shrink herself to fit in. The school began to feel like a place where dreams had ceilings, and that's when the incident happened. During a classroom activity called My Family at Work, each student was asked to bring a drawing or photo of what their parents did for a living. One boy brought a picture of his dad fixing cars. Another shared a photo of his mom at a salon. Amara brought a schematic diagram of a space engine, something her mum had let her trace. Laughter, snickers, and then a sharp voice, "Amara, enough with the fairy tales." It was Mrs. Cooper. The next day, Amara was called to the principal's office. Waiting there was Mr. Dorsey, the school's legal representative, and a man in a red tie who didn't bother to smile. Daniel Peterson didn't believe in wasting time. He adjusted his crimson tie, leaned back in the faux leather chair, and glanced at Amara with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. His voice was low, clipped, and confident, the kind that adults respect and children fear. "So," he said, tapping a pen against his notepad, "you're the little girl with the NASA fantasy." Mr. Dorsey cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Peterson is here to help us clarify a few things." Amara didn't flinch. Her mother had taught her not to cower before men who raised their voices to feel taller. "I wasn't fantasizing," she replied, chin raised. "My mom works there. She's a propulsion engineer." Peterson smiled in that way adults do when they think they're indulging a child. "And I'm Santa Claus," he said. The silence that followed was thick. Mr. Dorsey avoided eye contact. Amara crossed her arms. Peterson continued, "Look, Amara, no one's angry with you. But making up stories, especially ones that confuse or upset your classmates, well, that's something the school has to take seriously." "I didn't make anything up," she said, her voice now trembling, not from fear, but fury. Peterson stood up, towering over her. "We'll be having a formal review. You'll be expected to speak under oath. And I suggest you think very carefully about your next words." The meeting ended without resolution, but the damage was done. The school had escalated the matter to a legal hearing under the guise of protecting its reputation. Amara's words were now a liability. And Peterson? He'd make sure she was put in her place. That evening, Amara sat on the couch, holding her mother's work badge between her fingers. The metallic NASA logo gleamed under the lamp. Elise Johnson kneeled in front of her daughter. "They're trying to make you feel small because they can't imagine someone like us doing big things," Elise said softly. "But what they imagine is not your problem." Amara looked up. "He laughed at me, right in my face. Then give him a reason to never forget your name." Meanwhile, Daniel Peterson prepared for the hearing like he would for any other case: efficiency, strategy, and public perception. He had represented the school district in several controversial matters, most of which he won with ease. He knew how to dismantle narratives. He knew how to play juries like instruments. And above all, he knew one thing: truth was malleable when presented with enough confidence. Children exaggerate, especially ones who want attention, he told a reporter in an off-the-record briefing. The facts will speak for themselves. But not everyone at the school was blind. A young teacher named Mr. Langston, only 2 years into the profession, watched the events unfold with growing discomfort. He had seen Amara's diagram, had spoken briefly with her mother during pickup. He knew intelligence when he saw it, and he saw no lies in those eyes. He tried bringing his concerns to Mr. Dorsey, but was quickly silenced. "This isn't your place, Langston. Let the lawyers handle it." At the same time, Elise Johnson was torn. Her role at NASA was highly sensitive. Public exposure could complicate things. Appearances in court, risky, but how could she let her daughter stand alone? Amara's father, Malcolm, suggested hiring a lawyer. "Not just any lawyer," he said. "Someone who knows what it's like to fight uphill." Enter Marcus Hall, 32 years old, Harvard Law graduate, a rising star in civil rights litigation. His schedule was full, but when he read Elise's email, one line caught his attention. "My daughter told the truth. Now they're trying to punish her for it." He accepted the case. When he met Amara, he knelt to her level. "I believe you," he said. Amara blinked. "You do? I've walked in rooms like this before," he said, "and I know what it's like when they don't expect you to win." The lines were drawn, Amara and Marcus against the system. And in the center of it all stood Daniel Peterson, the man in the red tie, ready to crush them both with a smirk and a closing argument. The first hearing was set in a modest municipal courtroom, the kind that smelled of polished wood and stale coffee. Rows of plastic chairs faced a raised platform where Judge Ruth Delgado presided. Sharp-eyed, poised, and known for her no-nonsense demeanor, she glanced over the case file with visible interest. "This is unusual," she muttered, flipping through the pages. "A child accused of fabrication, and the school is treating it as a formal liability concern." Peterson stood with his signature smirk. "Your Honor, the issue here is about integrity. The school has a duty to ensure that what's said inside its classrooms doesn't disrupt the learning environment. Ms. Johnson's statements have caused confusion and ridicule among her peers." Marcus Hall remained seated, calm, composed, his eyes locked on the judge. "Your Honor, what we have here is not a matter of disruption. It's a matter of disbelief disguised as discipline. A young black girl spoke a truth that challenged stereotypes, and instead of being supported, she was silenced." Judge Delgado raised an eyebrow. "Strong start, Counselor, but I'll need more than speeches." "You'll get facts, Your Honor," Marcus replied. "Plenty of them." In the days leading up to the continuation of the hearing, Marcus and his paralegal team dove into the school's history. What they found was damning. Multiple complaints from students of color about being dismissed, ignored, or labeled disruptive when they excelled or spoke up. None of these complaints had reached public record until now. Meanwhile, Daniel Peterson doubled down on his strategy. He focused his argument on Amara's credibility. He pulled class reports, teacher notes, and even excerpts from the principal's own logs. "She's imaginative," he told the court, "but when fantasy becomes fact in a public setting, the school must act. We're not punishing her, we're protecting order." Marcus countered with fire. "So let me understand this. A child says her mother works at NASA, and instead of verifying, you escalate. Instead of supporting, you shame? That's not protecting order, that's perpetuating bias." Judge Delgado didn't interrupt. She took notes, lots of them. Outside the courtroom, the story began to leak. A local blog picked up on the case, then a regional news station. Soon headlines read, "Girl claims mom works at NASA, school laughs, court steps in. Truth on trial when a child's word isn't enough." Public opinion began to stir. Some sided with the school, arguing that the situation was being blown out of proportion. Others rallied behind Amara, with social media flooded by messages like "Let her speak" and "Believe black girls." Amara, meanwhile, tried to stay grounded. At home, she buried herself in books and space documentaries. Her favorite was a grainy video of Mae Jemison, the first black woman in space, reading from Star Trek and smiling. "She had to convince them too," Amara whispered. Her mother gently closed the laptop and placed a hand on her shoulder. "We're not here to convince. We're here to reveal. The truth doesn't change just because someone refuses to see it." Back in court, Peterson introduced a surprise witness, Mrs. Cooper, Amara's teacher. "Has Amara ever shown signs of exaggeration?" he asked. Mrs. Cooper hesitated, clearly uneasy. "She's bright, very bright. But yes, she tends to embellish. She told the class her mom works on rockets." Peterson turned to the judge. "There it is. Imagination, not information." Marcus rose from his seat slowly. "Mrs. Cooper, are you aware that Dr. Elise Johnson holds multiple patents in propulsion systems, that she's listed in NASA's official engineer database?" Mrs. Cooper blinked. I didn't know that." "And did you attempt to confirm Amara's claim before reporting it?" "No. No further questions." The courtroom murmured. The cracks in the school's case were showing, but Marcus knew they hadn't won. Not yet. The court needed more than logic. It needed impact. Behind the scenes, he was working on one more card to play, one that would change the entire momentum of the trial. All they needed was the right moment to lay it on the table. The silence in Elise Johnson's home that evening was heavier than usual. The walls, once filled with laughter and bedtime stories about constellations, now held tension like coiled wire. The television was off. The phone buzzed with notifications, most unread. Elise stood by the kitchen sink, hands gripping the counter as she stared blankly out the window. On the table behind her sat a sealed manila folder marked "Confidential." Inside were blueprints, performance reviews, and one letter, an official NASA commendation recognizing her contributions to the Artemis propulsion project. It was the proof, but it came with consequences. Malcolm stepped into the room, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You're not sleeping," he said. Elise didn't respond. "They're attacking her character," he continued, gently placing 1 mug on the counter beside her. Because she dared to be proud. She didn't just say I worked at NASA, Elise whispered. She said I design rockets. She said it with pride. And now they want her to be ashamed of it. Malcolm took a deep breath. You can end this, just show up. Take the stand. Say it out loud. That's not how it works, Elise snapped, then immediately softened. You think I haven't considered it. But if I speak publicly, my entire security clearance is at risk. I've worked on classified systems, testimonies, interviews. They raise red flags, you know that. She's 9 years old, Elise. The words landed like a punch. That night, Elise found Amara sitting on the bedroom floor, surrounded by a solar system model they had built months ago. Her tiny fingers were adjusting the orbit of Mars. Mom, Amara asked without looking up, do you think they'll believe me? Elise sat down beside her. Do you believe you told the truth? Amara nodded. Then that's all that matters. But it doesn't feel like enough, she whispered. Elise paused, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small metal badge. It shimmered under the soft light. The NASA logo gleamed beside her name. Take this with you tomorrow. Amara's eyes widened. Are you coming? No, but this speaks for me. The next morning, Marcus Hall met with Elise outside the courtroom. She handed him the manila folder without saying a word. This is more than we could have asked for, Marcus said, looking through the contents. Elise shook her head. Don't use my name, use the documents, let the facts speak. I can't risk being questioned about specifics. Marcus nodded, understanding the depth of her sacrifice. Inside the courtroom, Peterson noticed the folder immediately. He leaned over to Mr. Dorsey and whispered, What is that? Dorsey shrugged. No idea, but I don't like the look on his face. Marcus stood to address the court. Your Honor, I request permission to submit new material evidence. Judge Delgado looked up. Is it relevant? Directly. It confirms Amara Johnson's testimony. Proceed. Marcus approached the bench with measured steps and placed the folder before the judge. He didn't look at Peterson. He didn't need to. Delgado opened the folder, her eyes scanning the documents quickly, then again, more slowly. Her posture shifted. When she looked up, something in her gaze had changed. Mr. Peterson, she said, have you or your client made any effort to verify the truth of the student's statements? Peterson faltered. We were under the impression that the burden of proof is being carried by a 9-year-old girl, the judge cut in. Let's move on. Amara watched it all unfold, gripping her mother's badge tightly in her lap. For the first time since the ordeal began, she felt a flicker of power, not the loud, commanding kind, but the quiet, unwavering kind her mother lived by. Later that day, as the hearing adjourned, Marcus approached her and whispered, You gave them something they didn't expect. What? The truth, when they weren't ready for it. But the storm hadn't passed. The school was now pushing harder, calling new witnesses and questioning Elise's absence. Peterson was far from defeated. The weight of a mother wasn't just in her work. It was in the silence she carried to protect what mattered most. The following week, the courthouse halls were busier. Reporters hovered outside, and whispered conversations echoed off the marble walls. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Elise's folder had cast a long shadow over Peterson's strategy, but the defense wasn't backing down. In the quiet of a side room, Marcus Hall sat with Amara reviewing notes. Her small fingers traced the lines of her mother's badge over and over, like it was a talisman. Her voice, though soft, was steady. Mr. Hall, why do they keep saying I lied? He looked up from his papers. Because sometimes people see truth as a threat, especially when it comes from someone they didn't expect. But I just said my mom works for NASA, Marcus leaned forward, and you said it with pride. That's what bothers them more than anything. Just before the session began, a new figure entered the courtroom. A woman in a dark navy blazer with silver hair pulled into a tight bun. Her name was Judge Ruth Delgado, and though she had overseen the case from the start, today she walked with different energy. Something about her presence commanded attention. Before sitting, she made a request. I'd like to make a brief disclosure. The room fell silent. My parents were immigrants. My mother cleaned offices. My father laid bricks. When I told my teachers I wanted to be a judge, they smiled the way you smile at a child who says she wants to be a unicorn. She paused. So let's keep that in mind as we proceed today. With that, the trial resumed. Peterson, unfazed, called his next witness, the school's assistant principal, Ms. Delacroix. Would you say Amara Johnson is disruptive? He asked. No, she replied carefully. But she's intense, passionate. Sometimes she takes up a lot of space. Marcus didn't object. Instead, when it was his turn, he walked slowly toward her. Miss Delacroix, what do you mean by takes up a lot of space? I mean she speaks with confidence. She corrects her peers. She acts like she knows more than others. Does she? Delacroix blinked. Well, yes, actually. She's ahead in science and reading. Then perhaps she's not taking space. She's just filling the space others leave empty. Delacroix shifted uncomfortably. I didn't mean to imply... I know, Marcus said, nodding. But that's the problem, isn't it? She knows who she is, and that bothers people. Later that afternoon, Marcus made a strategic move. He called a surprise witness. Jude Evans, a retired NASA engineer who once mentored Elise during her graduate internship. Evans took the stand, tall and composed, wearing a pin with the agency's iconic logo. Mr. Evans, Marcus began, do you know Dr. Elise Johnson? I do, I worked with her directly. She's one of the brightest propulsion minds of her generation. Did she ever express concern about being open about her work? Evans nodded solemnly. All the time. Not because she wasn't proud, but because she knew people wouldn't believe her. Or worse, they'd target her daughter for it. Peterson objected. Speculation, but was overruled. Evans continued. She told me she was raising her daughter to understand that truth has value, even when others try to devalue it. Marcus turned to the jury. And what's that value based on? Evans didn't hesitate. Her name. Amara watched from the bench, her eyes wide. Marcus caught her gaze and gave the smallest of nods. That night at home, Amara asked her mum, "Why did you name me Amara?" Elise smiled. "It means grace in Igbo, and in many languages it also means eternal." Amara thought for a moment. "Then I want to keep saying my name, loud, so they remember it." Elise leaned in. "That's the first step to changing the world." The courtroom buzzed as the next witness entered. It was Mr. Anders, a fifth-grade science teacher with 20 years of experience and a reputation for keeping things traditional. He adjusted his glasses and nodded politely to Judge Delgado before taking the stand. Daniel Peterson looked pleased. "Mr. Anders," he began, "you've had Amara Johnson in your classroom on multiple occasions?" "Yes, I've supervised her during a few enrichment sessions," Anders replied. "Would you say she's imaginative?" A pause. Then, "She's curious, bright, but sometimes, yes, she speaks beyond her experience, like when she claimed her mother was part of a secret rocket project." Peterson smiled. "And how did that impact the classroom dynamic?" "It created confusion. Some students began questioning whether their own parents were doing enough. A few even felt embarrassed. So her statements didn't inspire." "I wouldn't say that." "Thank you. No further questions." Marcus rose from his chair and walked slowly toward the witness stand. "Mr. Anders," he said, voice calm, "can you tell us the name of the enrichment program you supervised for Amara?" "Advanced Scientific Exploration," he replied. "And why was she selected for that program?" "She scored in the top percentile of science assessments, which means she has strong aptitude." Marcus nodded. "So a child with top percentile scores in science, whose mother is an aerospace engineer, tells her class that her mother works at NASA, and instead of exploring that as a learning opportunity, you felt confusion was the priority." Anders shifted in his seat. Marcus pressed further. "Did you ever ask Elise Johnson, Amara's mother, about her career?" "No." "Did you ever Google her name?" "No." "Then your doubts were based on what, exactly?" Anders hesitated. "It just didn't seem likely. Because of her background?" "I never said that." No further questions. The courtroom sat still. No one needed to say it. The implication was loud enough. Outside the building, the press had picked up momentum. Headlines now read, "NASA engineer's daughter targeted at school. Expert witnesses begin to crack under pressure." Peterson, visibly annoyed, called a closed meeting with the school board that evening. "We're losing the media battle," he said bluntly. "This isn't just a case anymore, it's a spectacle. We need to neutralize the narrative." "So what do we do?" Mr. Dorsey asked. "We hit back with emotion. The court sees this as a crusade for truth. Let's remind them this is about protecting children." The next day, Peterson introduced a new witness, a parent of one of Amara's classmates. Mrs. Kellerman, a PTA member and vocal community figure, took the stand with confidence. "My daughter came home crying after Amara's NASA story. She felt inferior. "Would you say this incident disrupted her emotional well-being?" Peterson asked. "Yes. She started questioning whether our family was important enough. No 9-year-old should feel that way." Marcus didn't flinch. "Mrs. Kellerman, was your daughter encouraged to research what Amara said?" "No." "Did you reach out to the Johnsons?" "No." "Did you ever consider that maybe your discomfort had more to do with your own assumptions than Amara's words?" Objection. Sustained. Still, the message hung in the air. In the hallway after the hearing, Marcus found Amara sitting alone on a bench, head lowered. "You okay? They keep saying I made everyone feel bad," she whispered. He crouched beside her. "Sometimes, telling the truth makes people face things they'd rather ignore." Amara nodded slowly. "I feel like they're all against me." "You're not alone," he said. "But I need you to be brave for just a little longer. We're almost there." Later that night at the Johnson home, Elise sat with her husband staring at the TV. A commentator debated whether Amara was being used to push a political message. "I knew this would happen," Elise muttered. "They'll attack her to distract from their own failure." Malcolm looked at her. "Then it's time we stop being quiet." Elise picked up her phone and opened an encrypted messaging app. Her thumb hovered over a contact labeled NASA PR Liaison. She clicked Send. Monday morning, Marcus Hall arrived at the courthouse early, a thermos of coffee in one hand and a fire in his chest. The case had become more than legal strategy. It was a personal battle against something far bigger, an institution too comfortable with its own blindness. In his office upstairs, he reviewed the email that had landed in his inbox at 2:14 a.m. Subject: Media statement prepared. From NASA Communications Division, body pending internal clearance. Will confirm external approval by 10:00 a.m. EST. Ready to support Dr. Johnson's public position if requested. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It had begun. He pulled out his notepad and began outlining his closing strategy. They were nearing the end. Peterson had played all his cards: emotional witnesses, character insinuations, and selective language. But Marcus had something better: undeniable proof, a bold narrative shift, and a story that had captured hearts beyond the courtroom walls. The plan hinged on timing. When court resumed, Marcus requested a delay until the afternoon session, citing the need for new documentation. Peterson protested, but Judge Delgado granted the motion without hesitation. During the break, Elise arrived, not in a blazer or lab coat, but in jeans and a plain navy shirt. No badge, no paperwork, just herself. "I'm ready," she said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Ready for what?" "To speak, not just for her, but for every girl being told she dreams too loud." They met in the courthouse media room, where a modest press conference had been arranged. Only a few reporters were allowed inside. Elise stepped up to the podium. Cameras clicked, the red light blinked on. "My name is Dr. Elise Johnson. I am a propulsion systems engineer at NASA, and my daughter Amara told the truth." A murmur rose from the small crowd. "I've spent my career designing systems that send human beings into space. And I've spent my life being told I don't look like someone who belongs there." My daughter repeated something she hears at our dinner table, about science, about possibility, about space, and instead of being believed, she was punished. Her voice remained calm, but each word landed like a drumbeat. "Let this be clear. We are not here to entertain doubt. We are here to end it." The clip hit the internet like wildfire. Within hours, it was trending on every platform. News anchors replayed it. Celebrities reposted it. Hashtags like Amara's Truth and Mothers in STEM exploded. Back in the courtroom, Peterson looked pale. His phone vibrated non-stop. Whispers passed between his assistants. A statement was being prepared by the school district's PR team, but the damage had already been done. Judge Delgado entered, unusually quiet. She held her phone for an extra moment before silencing it and calling the room to order. "Mr. Hall," she said, "you may proceed." Marcus stood slowly. "Your Honor, we rest our case, and we request the court consider immediate review based on newly verified public statements." Peterson stood. "Objection. This is media manipulation." "Sit down, Mr. Peterson," Judge Delgado interrupted. "This court doesn't respond to headlines, but it does respond to truth." The rest of the session moved quickly. No new witnesses, no more attempts to twist the narrative. Peterson had run out of room to maneuver. After the hearing, Amara stepped outside into a wall of reporters. She clung to her mom's hand. "Elise," a journalist called out, "how do you feel about the overwhelming response?" She looked down at Amara, hopeful, not because the world changed, but because my daughter didn't. That night, as they sat around the dinner table, Malcolm lit a candle in the center. "For strength," he said. Amara raised her glass of juice. "And for names that matter, because the plan wasn't just about winning a case, it was about rewriting the story from the inside out." And the final page was almost here. The day of the final hearing arrived with a strange stillness in the air. The courthouse was unusually quiet, as though it, too, knew that something important was about to unfold. Inside the courtroom, the seats filled slowly. Family members, school board officials, a few curious members of the public, and more reporters than ever before. Marcus Hall stood beside Amara at the defense table. She wore a navy blue dress, her hair braided neatly, and around her neck hung her mother's NASA badge. Not hidden, not tucked away, displayed with pride. "Are you ready?" Marcus whispered. Amara nodded once. "I want to speak." "Then speak with everything you've got." Judge Delgado entered. She looked rested, firm, and more focused than usual. As she reviewed the docket, she paused for a beat longer than necessary. "We'll begin with closing statements," she said. Peterson stood first. His expression had changed over the last few days. Gone was the confident smirk. In its place, a sort of practiced humility. "This case, Your Honor, is not about discrediting a child. It's about the institution's duty to manage truth responsibly. The school did what it thought was necessary to prevent disruption." He paused, then added, "We respect the Johnson family and their achievements, but this matter was never meant to escalate. We believe the school acted in accordance with its policies." He sat down quickly, almost as if escaping. Then Marcus stood. He didn't approach the bench. He didn't lift his voice. Instead, he placed both hands on the defense table and looked directly at the judge. "This case is about more than policy. It's about perception. A little girl told the truth, and instead of being believed, she was branded as disruptive." He pointed gently toward Amara. "She said her mother works for NASA. She said it because it was true, but no one checked. No one asked. They assumed." He walked slowly toward the center of the courtroom. "Assumptions aren't neutral. They're built from the images we've been fed, of who belongs where, of who gets to dream out loud." He held up a copy of the NASA commendation letter. This wasn't about confusion, this was about comfort. It was uncomfortable for some to believe that a black girl's mother could be a scientist. So they tried to shrink her, contain her, make her quiet. He turned to the judge. "But the truth has a way of expanding, of shining." He looked at Amara. "Would you like to say something?" Judge Delgado paused. "Only if the court agrees." There were no objections. Amara rose, walked to the front of the room and faced the bench. "My name is Amara Johnson," she began. "I'm 9 years old. I like science and stars. My mom works for NASA. That's not a story I made up. It's just part of who I am." She took a breath. But when I said it out loud, people laughed. Not just kids, grown-ups, teachers, lawyers. Her voice wavered, but she stood taller. "But my mom told me something. She said, when you speak the truth, sometimes it makes people uncomfortable. That's not your fault. That's their choice." She lifted the badge from around her neck. "So I'm not going to be quiet. I'm not going to make myself smaller just because someone else refuses to see how big my dreams are." The room was silent. Not a sound, not a shuffle, just stillness. Judge Delgado leaned forward. "Thank you, Miss Johnson." And then, like divine punctuation, the courtroom doors opened behind them. Every head turned. Standing there was a woman in a gray blazer, modest heels, and a NASA ID clipped to her collar. "Apologies for the delay," she said, stepping forward. "I represent the NASA Office of External Affairs. We're here to confirm Dr. Elise Johnson's employment and contributions." She handed a sealed document to the clerk. "We didn't want to interfere," she added, "but after watching the news we felt it was time to say it out loud." The final piece had arrived. Not just a badge, not just a letter, but a voice from the very institution they said didn't belong to people like Amara. And now the only thing left was the verdict. Judge Delgado tapped her pen twice against the wooden bench before setting it down. She scanned the courtroom, her eyes resting for a moment on Amara, then Marcus, and finally Peterson. The air felt sharper now, like the entire room was holding its breath. "This hearing has raised questions not only about the actions of a school," she began, but about the biases we carry, the voices we silence, and the truths we choose not to believe. Peterson stood abruptly. "Your Honor, if I may—" "No, Mr. Peterson," she cut in, her tone icy. "You've had your turn." He sat down, jaw tight. Judge Delgado turned toward Marcus. "Mr. Hall, I assume you've submitted all final documentation?" "Yes, Your Honor," he said confidently. "Then let's proceed to a ruling." But before she could continue, Peterson stood again, desperation now leaking into his voice. "Your Honor, I move for dismissal on grounds of undue media influence and external pressure. The courtroom has been compromised." Marcus didn't even blink. "Compromised?" he echoed. "Is that what we call truth now?" Peterson turned to face the room. "With all due respect, this trial was never about race or gender. It's about protocol. A child disrupted classroom dynamics with an unverified claim. The school responded within its rights." Judge Delgado raised an eyebrow. "Do you mean the same unverified claim that NASA just publicly confirmed?" Peterson hesitated. "That changes the narrative after the fact." "No," Marcus said, stepping forward. "It reveals that the narrative you've clung to was never the truth." The tension snapped like a pulled wire. Delgado gestured toward Amara. "Miss Johnson, I need to ask you one last time. Did you tell your class that your mother works for NASA?" Amara stood tall. "Yes, Your Honor." "And is that true?" "Yes." "Then the court acknowledges that the foundation of this entire disciplinary hearing was built on a false assumption." Peterson rose for a third time. "With respect, Your Honor, this sets a dangerous precedent. Children will say anything for attention. We cannot reward that." Marcus spun on his heel. "This isn't about rewarding a child. It's about holding adults accountable for the damage they cause when they let prejudice cloud their judgment." He pointed directly at Peterson. "You didn't investigate, you didn't verify, you assumed. And then you weaponized those assumptions to humiliate a little girl for having pride in her family." The room fell into stunned silence. Peterson opened his mouth, but no words came out. His argument, carefully crafted, aggressively delivered, was unraveling thread by thread in front of everyone. Judge Delgado spoke clearly and firmly. "This court finds that the actions taken by Oak Ridge Elementary and its representatives were not only excessive, but rooted in personal bias and failure to follow basic due diligence." She paused, then continued. "The disciplinary actions against Amara Johnson are hereby voided. Furthermore, the court recommends a formal review of the school's internal practices regarding cultural competency and student support." Peterson slumped back into his chair, visibly deflated. Across the aisle, Elise reached for Amara's hand. Tears welled in her eyes but didn't fall. There was no breakdown, no celebration, just quiet relief. Marcus allowed himself one deep breath. One. And then the reporters burst into motion. Flashbulbs, scribbling pens, microphones being shoved into place. Everyone wanted the first quote, the first image. But Amara didn't flinch. She leaned toward her mother and whispered, "Can we go home now?" Elise smiled. "Yes, we can." As they exited the courtroom hand in hand, the cameras followed, the questions flying like arrows. "What do you have to say, Amara?" She paused, turned back and said simply, "I told the truth. Sometimes that's all it takes to win." But this was only the beginning, because while the battle had been won, there was still one final twist waiting around the corner. The sun had already begun to set when the Johnson family finally returned home. Elise unlocked the front door, and Amara ran straight to the living room, collapsing onto the couch like she had just crossed a finish line. Malcolm followed behind, arms full of congratulatory cards and balloons from well-wishers outside the courthouse. For a moment there was peace, but peace doesn't always last. Elise's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She glanced at the screen, then stopped cold. "Marcus Hall." She answered immediately. "Marcus." His voice was tight. "We may have a problem." Elise's stomach sank. "What kind of problem?" "The school district just released a statement. They're not accepting the court's recommendation, and there's more. The Department of Defense is opening a review of your public disclosure." The words hit like a punch. "They're questioning my clearance," she said, her voice suddenly hollow. "I'm sorry, Elise," Marcus said. "I didn't see this coming." Amara stepped into the kitchen, hearing the edge in her mother's tone. "Is something wrong?" Elise forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. Everything's fine." But it wasn't. Not really. That night, Elise sat alone at the dining table, a single desk lamp casting soft light across the NASA documents she had shared. Her past work on classified propulsion systems now hung like a weight around her neck. She hadn't broken any laws, technically, but in a world of national security, technically, often wasn't enough. Malcolm sat beside her. "They want to make an example of you. I spoke as a mother," she whispered, "and now they're treating me like a liability." But before despair could settle, a ding came from her inbox. A subject line, "Internal Memo," from NASA Administrator's Office. The message read, "We stand with Dr. Elise Johnson. Her integrity remains unquestioned. Public response has demonstrated the necessity of her voice in STEM outreach. Clearance review suspended pending further evaluation." She stared at the screen in disbelief. Malcolm exhaled. "So, they're backing down?" "No," she said slowly. "They're stepping up." The next morning, Elise received another email, this time from NASA's Education Outreach Division. They were inviting her and Amara to speak at an upcoming event. Daughters of Science Celebrating Women of Color in STEM. Marcus called minutes later. "They want you to be the face of a new initiative. They're calling it Project Amara." Elise laughed. Not because it was funny, but because after everything, the very thing used to try to silence them had now become a platform for amplification. But the unexpected twist wasn't just about Elise's vindication, it was Amara. The press still surrounded their house for days, but Amara began answering questions with a new kind of clarity. Her voice had strength now, not loud, but deep. When asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, she said, "A scientist, and someone who helps other kids be heard." Her story began circulating in classrooms across the country. Teachers played clips of her courtroom speech. Students sent letters. One child from Detroit wrote, "Because of you, I told my class my dad drives ambulances. I used to be embarrassed. Now I'm proud." That's when Elise realized something powerful. The trial hadn't just been about clearing her name or protecting her daughters. It had become a spark, one that lit fires in places they would never see. But not everyone was pleased. Peterson quietly resigned weeks later. The school district issued a half-hearted apology that did little to heal the wound, but it didn't matter anymore. The narrative had escaped their control. And as for Judge Delgado, she wrote a private note to Amara, handwritten on court stationery. "Never let them decide how big your voice should be. You've already shown the world how powerful the truth can be." Amara taped it above her desk, right next to her drawing of a rocket. But now, instead of floating in space alone, the rocket carried a name on its side. Amara 1. The ship wasn't real, not yet, but the future, that was already launching. Months had passed since the trial, but its echoes still lingered in classrooms, households, and courtrooms across the country. Amara Johnson was no longer just the girl who said her mom worked at NASA. She had become a symbol, not of rebellion, not of controversy, but of conviction. At school, things changed. New policies were introduced. Teachers received training on unconscious bias. And Amara, she returned to her classroom not with fear, but with purpose. She knew who she was, and now so did everyone else. Elise continued her work at NASA, but with a renewed voice. She led mentorship programs for girls of color, visited schools, and spoke at conferences. Not because it was easy, but because it mattered. Project Amara became a national initiative, inviting mothers and daughters into spaces once closed to them. And every time someone asked if the story was real, Marcus Hall would smile and say, "More real than most people were ready for." As for Amara, she kept dreaming of stars, of ships, of new worlds. Not because she needed to prove anyone wrong anymore, but because the sky no longer felt like a limit. This wasn't just a courtroom victory. It was a shift, a declaration. That truth matters, even when it's inconvenient. That children deserve to be heard, and that dreams, no matter who dreams them, are worth defending. Because one girl said the words, "My mom works at NASA," and refused to sit down when the world laughed. And in doing so, she reminded us, the future doesn't ask permission. It takes its place, one voice at a time. If this story moved you, inspired you, or opened your heart, subscribe now and share it with someone who needs to believe again.